Family viewing.
You, wherever you are, welcome to Elimu Live on KUTV. My name is Tony Brian Ochieng. I'm a teacher of English and literature at the Komarok School in Nairobi. And today we are going to learn English, that is essay writing for Form 4 English. The set book we're going to use to learn how to write essay today is the compulsory set text, that is Fathers of Nations by Paul Vita. Before we delve into the details of essay writing, I wish to say what I do and where I teach. Other than teaching English and literature at the Komarok School, Mr. Tony Brian Ochieng is an author of English revision books. I've done a book called Reloaded, English Progressive, Paper 1, that helps learners on matters KCSE, that is functional writing, close test, and oral skills. I've done this book alongside other authors, Kelvin Nyamache of EduLight International and Jacqueline Mukiri of Buruburu Girls High School in Nairobi. Other than that, I've also done Reloaded Progressive English Paper 2 that covers comprehension passage, excerpts from Fathers of Nations and the Samaritan. We also have, it also covers oral literature such as narratives and songs, and it also covers poetry, which is a challenge to most students. And lastly, this book covers grammar in details. This book I've done also with another author, an examiner of English Paper 2, Benson Wagude of Bishop Linus Okok Girls High School in Homa Bay County. Lastly, I've done this book here called Reloaded Progressive English Paper 3, which shares with the learners the secrets of writing good imaginative compositions. It not only presents the secrets of writing good imaginative composition, but it also helps learners to understand the moral values embedded in English Paper 3, such as essays on Fathers of Nations, the Samaritan, and even A Silent Song and Other Stories. These books are available at Nuria Bookshop, that is Nairobi, Moi Avenue, the Bazaar, first floor, where you can get them there. That said, I wish to start the lesson today. We are looking at essay writing. An essay. And what is the test? What do we mean by an essay? An essay is a composition that is presented in writing. A composition that is presented in writing and is normally tested under English Paper 3. So we have essays, a composition presented in writing, which is presented under English Paper 3. Now, like I've mentioned earlier, essay writing is a skill that is tested in English Paper 3, and Paper 3 is one of the examinable papers in English. English has got 3 papers, Paper 1, Paper 2, Paper 3. So what does Paper 3 test? The first thing that Paper 3 tests is the ability to communicate in writing. Is the learner able to communicate in writing using English language? And when you're looking at communication, we are looking at, is the learner able to use correct linguistic forms to communicate? Can the learner use the right parts of speech to communicate? Can the learner follow the rules of sentence structure well, such as subject-verb agreement? Can the learner use tense correctly? Can the learner use aspect correctly? So that is what we are testing in the first point. That is ability to communicate in writing. And communication also looking at spelling of words. We're also looking at punctuation in writing. And secondly, paper 3 tests the learner's ability to think critically. Critical thinking skills. And this is through the set books, because the set books are the stories they study, like a novel. For example, the novel like Fathers of Nation, which is a novel that they study. Are they able to derive meaning from the text and relate the story to what happens to them in real life? And lastly, paper 3 also tests the learner's ability to solve problems. And because some of the questions will present problems, and the learner is expected to provide solutions. Now, at this level, I wish to look at some of the past KCSE questions. What is the observation that most examiners have made when it comes to writing essays? First, we've come to appreciate that most of the learners know how to write good introduction and even good conclusion. They can come up with valid points of interpretation. So in a question like last year's question on the Samaritan tested the success of any new idea relies on determination, and the learners were supposed to use Nicole as an illustration. So we saw that most learners could come up with a point. But however, the challenges that we've witnessed and we are going to provide solutions in this lesson is one, inadequate textual illustrations. Most learners do not give enough evidence from the book to support the arguments that they have. So that they just mention a point without any illustration. For instance, on Fathers of Nation, a learner may be told to write an essay to prove that revenge does not pay. But you find that most learners will focus on maybe a character like Tahir, who revenges against Rama by slapping her. And then they just stop at that Tahir revenges against Rama by slapping her for removing a head veil in public. That they do not give details from the set book. All the argument that follows become too philosophical and removed from the reality of the set book. So in paper 3, the set book is the Bible. So Fathers of Nations in this case is going to be the Bible. It's going to be the law. Any argument that we'll draw from this book will come from Fathers of Nation. Secondly, a challenge we also witness is background information. Most learners do not know how to present background information. They talk about a point, but they don't tell us how that action started. The background information, it's missing. What led to Engineer Tahir in Fathers of Nation slapping Rama? So it's very important that we appreciate the dynamics of background. Another thing that I wish to mention at this point is, thank you so much, that we must also look at reading. Do learners read the set book? Most learners do not read the set book. They find something that is not it's not interesting for them to read. So you get Fathers of Nations, people have the Samaritan, they have them in school, Nguza Jadi, but they do not read. And because they do not read, they can't remember exactly what is in the set book. So we encourage learners to read the set book so as to have good mastery of content. We are saying you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't have the illustrations, the textual details from the set book, then I'm sorry, you might not write a good essay. So solution, we are saying students must read and master the text. Read and master. How many times? At least 25 times. If you're in Form 4, you should strive, and you should not, you can just read the book into episodes. You don't need to read the whole of it. You can say today you are reading the story of Pastor Chiamaka Chineke. And you read the story of Pastor Chiamaka Chineke. You pick another day, look at the story of Engineer Saif Tahir. This will also, after reading try to narrate it to a friend. Write a summary of the events that you read. This will help you remember. Research has proven that when you read and you write down what you read, the content is easily retained within your brain. And another way is to narrate it to a friend or tell a friend about what you've read, or engage in debates or discussions on the points that you read. This will really help you to internalize the events in the text. At this level, I wish that we look at how to respond to KCSE essay questions. It's important to know how to write essays. But before we write the essay, it's also important for us to know, what are we talking about? KCSE lately has moved from the past experience where learners were expected to talk about literary analysis of themes, styles, and character traits. Today, the books are about the universal human values that are embedded in the set book. According to the KICD syllabus, one of the goals of teaching English in high school, goal number 20, is that by the end of the 4 years education, the learner should be able to apply universal human values embedded in the set text. So Fathers of Nations, The Samaritan, A Silent Song and Other Stories, Parliament of Owls, and Artist of the Floating World, these books have certain moral values that apply to our real life real life situations. So how do we get these moral values? One, divide the book into into episodes. What is an episode? A part of the book. And like for Fathers of Nations, I'll give you the episodes in a short while. Divide those books into several parts, like maybe the arrival of the 4 Agda observers is an episode. Another episode is Fiona interviewing Afolabi. So you've divided it into those parts. And as you're doing that, ask yourself, what is the event? Like the event in the first episode in this novel, in chapter 1 of this novel, is the arrival of the 4 observers at the Seamount Hotel. So what is happening? They're checking in. Basically, they're checking in, they're mentioning their names, and they're being allocated rooms, and the allocation of the rooms or the assignment of the rooms has to do symbolically with the countries where they come from. So what is the event there, and who are the characters involved? When you're analyzing an episode, look at the event. Who are the characters that are involved? What actions, what activities are they involved in? What are they saying? And it's important. Now this is where critical thinking becomes very important. You read what the characters do or what is said about them. And how do the characters interact? How do they engage? When a character says this, how does the other character respond? It's very important for us to understand that. Lastly, what is the moral lesson? For instance, a good example of the story, if we pick the episode of Professor Kimani visiting Newborn Olomu, the MP, to confront him on why he stole his wife, Asia Omondi. Of course, he gets in, and we are told he meets some young secretaries there who are laughing at some joke in the air. And he introduces himself and he says he wants to meet Newborn Olomu. And of course, when he goes there, you see the confrontation, or he's being told to sit down. But of course, he begins the abuses. You fat baboon. Okay? He abuses Newborn Olomu, fat baboon. And you see the exchange. Of course, at first, Newborn Olomu is very calm and seems not to want to confront or exchange with Professor Kimani. But later on, he's pushed to the wall because they start fighting. Professor Kimani cannot take it anymore. Newborn Olomu is making fun of his situation, because the first thing he asks him, why do you want to steal my wife? Okay, and Newborn Olomu corrects him, saying, it's not about stealing your wife, maybe take your wife, but since you prefer calling it stealing, a professor in Texas says it is something that is normal. That wife stealing or spouse stealing is something common and normal in Texas. And Newborn Olomu goes to even quote statistics from Britain, Greece, of wife or spouse stealing. Of course, this one annoys Professor Kimani. Kimani is not happy. He isn't. Someone has taken your wife and is bragging and showing it on your face. So it's a challenge. The next thing you see after that, he asked him, Professor Kimani tells Newborn Olomu, you already have 3 other young wives. Why do you want to take my wife? She's old. And Newborn Olomu says, old is gold. That brings another conflict in that book. And of course, later on, we see them fighting each other, and the fight does not end until the policemen arrive to stop them. And what follows is that Professor Kimani is demoted by the University of Nairobi from that position of a professor to a starting position of a senior lecturer. He's also jailed for 6 months, and you see he suffers. So that episode, we can get the moral lesson. What is the moral lesson? That when we are angry, we can do things that make us regret. We see Professor Kimani is punished for his act of revenge and bitterness. So that is the best way to study those episodes. So what are some of the episodes in Fathers of Nation? The following are the episodes that you could read and understand the moral value. We have the arrival at the Seamount Hotel. We also have, the forward is the first one where the writer prepares you to the story, what happened at the summit. And of course, you have the arrival at the Seamount, that is page 1 to page 2. Page 2 to 4 is first call from the guide. The guide, of course, at this point, Afolabi is not talking about himself. He does not introduce himself. He just calls himself the guide. Page 4 to 10 is Fiona and Afolabi's interview. And it's important to study that episode very well because that episode is the inciting action of this novel. We get the idea of the conflict, that why are the heads of state in Banjul, Gambia? And by the way, what is happening between Fiona and Afolabi there? Why does Fiona ask Afolabi his age? And why does he respond? Because she begins by asking Afolabi 40, and Afolabi doesn't get it. 40, your age, and says 45, and Fiona says, wow, to my 35. What does that mean? Then you also look at page 10 to 15, that is the pain of hosting VIPs. What is the challenge of hosting the heads of state? How do they sit? Which country sits in front? Will Zimbabwe begins with the letter Z? Does it mean they'll always occupy the last seat at the summit? Algeria will always occupy the first seat because of letter A. Let's look at those dynamics. And then page 16 to 20 is the second phone call from the guide. Page 21 to 22 is the rise of Professor Kimani. We get the story of Professor Kimani, how he went to Oxford University. And then page 22 to 25 is the global recession. The next page is page 25 to 34 is Professor Kimani's problems. And then page 35 to 38 is Kimani and Olomu fight. And then page 38 45, which is very important. And that page, I want you to read it very well because it gives us the moral value in this story. That page 38 and 45. Understand the dialogue between Tad Longway and Professor Kimani. Then page 38 to 45, Kimani joining Agda. And page 46 to 48, the taxi ride. The next episode we have there is page 48 to 57. Fiona joins Voice of America from the Gambian News. And then the next page you have is the page 57 to 65, the Liberian Mola. I believe it will be shown on your screen, the next episode that is. Then you have Afolabi in Boston, page 66 to 70. Then Afolabi meeting Afolabi meets Tad Longway, page 70 to 74. Page 75 to 81, Pamela divorces Afolabi. Page 82 to 85, security screening. Page 85 to 99, Melusi joins Agda. Page 100 to 104, that is breaking the ice. The relationship, how do the heads of state interact there? Who is greeted first? Then look at page 105 to 114, the story of Pastor Chiamaka there, and page 114 to 116, Pastor Chiamaka's woes. Page 117 to 120 is the story of Engineer Saif Tahir. Page 120, 124 is the accident, how Engineer Saif Tahir lost his eye after Rama slit it with a letter opener. Then page 124 to 125 is Tahir joining Agda. Page 126 to 132, the secret agenda. And page 132, 137 is Fiona meeting Tad Longway. Then Fiona and Afolabi discussing the development strategies is page 137 to 140. Then Pia Chiamaka's revenge, attempted revenge at the summit which fails, page 141 to 143. And then the meeting in room 2059 center, that is where Tad Longway meets the AGDA 4 and Afolabi, page 143 to 149. A very significant episode, really, you need to read. And then we have the summit opening, page 150 to 152. That is the Minister Zindo's presentation. And then page 152, 156, also very significant. The introduction of Path Alpha in the summit. Remember, Path Alpha was not in the summit agenda. Another thing that we have there is the debate, the heads of state debate on the document, where Omega and Path Alpha look at what President Didier Bangora says. What does President Simba Ibarossa say? What does Bibo Dibonso say? What does King Jemba Jemba IV say at the summit? And then look at page 168, 172, the trick and the choice matrix, and then look at Path Alpha. And lastly, on page 180 to 182 is the victory of Path Alpha, the way Path Alpha wins using that choice matrix, where the coin is tossed and it goes to the favor in favor of Path Alpha. And lastly is the page 183 to 184, the unceremonious ending, when Bibo Dibonso is not satisfied with the results of the summit and pulls out a pistol or a gun, scaring the other heads of state because you want a repeat of the process. But look at the AGDA people. How did they walk out? They are very happy. And lastly, notice that Fiona walks with Afolabi holding hands, wondering about the summit. So that is how you can divide that book and see it and read it. So you don't need to read it the whole book once. Just pick that page and read it and do what I said earlier. Now, at this point, I want us now to see, I want to assume now we've read the book. How do we write an essay? I'd like us now at this point to use a sample essay question from the set book. Remember, the set books will be testing moral values like I've mentioned, virtues and vices. And on page 40 of this book, 38 to 42 of this book, it's important that we read those pages where Tad Longway meets Afolabi. There are significant points where the moral values come from. Tad Longway of AGDA. You know, when you want to understand a moral value, you need to understand the conflict in the book. The conflict in the Fathers of Nations is the development strategies were Omega and Path Alpha. So understanding that conflict is very important. Who is for Omega? The heads of state and the African ministers of planning. Where Omega was a document written by 20 Nobel laureates, and they wanted to develop Africa. And according to Afolabi, this document is going to put an end to military coups, rigged elections, civil wars, and Afolabi is pushing for that. But on the other side, there is another organization called Agency for Governance and Development in Africa, which thinks there is a better document than Omega. And this document, they call it Path Alpha, that through Path Alpha, they can bring change in Africa. And they have identified some problems that bedevil Africa, which are 5. One is poverty, disease, ignorance. And lately, there are 2 new problems in Africa. The 2 new arrivals are corruption and impunity. So according to Tad Longway in Fathers of Nations, he visited Professor Kimani to ask him to join AGDA. And why is this significant? This is significant because of one thing. It sets the moral lesson in the book. He says that presently, many people are angry because our heads of state are riding on our backs. So that many citizens in countries are suffering. They have things that make them angry. Look at African countries. Look at the African countries. Are Africans happy? No. The news that we watch every day on TV is awash with the people frustrated with their systems of governance because they are suffering. A Tad Longway tells Professor Kimani that that thing that happens there is because of anger. And because of anger, anger changes to rage. And rage changes to fury. According to Tad Longway, fury does not bring change. That just being extremely furious, we can never have change. So what can bring change? He says fury spills out into random acts of violence which cancel out. And therefore, what is he suggesting? And this is where many people who read this book have misunderstood it. For them, they think the book is saying that when people are frustrated by their governments, they should go out and protest. if you read that page very well, Third Longway makes it clear that being angry and going out to fight for your rights, it results into violence. That will not bring change. So we must read the book the way the author wants it, not the way we know it. The author says uncontrolled anger can only bring more problems. And in this book, we ask ourselves, are there characters in this book that cannot control their anger and they suffer? You have it. You have it. That is the moral lesson. Are there characters that are frustrated and because of their anger, they react in a way that they regret? You already have the points. So that is a moral lesson, and that covers the vice. But Tad goes ahead to tell Kimani that there is a solution, that instead of this anger changing into violence, it should make sense. And he thinks that there's an agency that can bring change, and that agency is called Agency for Governance Development in Africa, AGDA. In this agency, they want to change the Africa status quo. According to them, the only way that Africa can have change is to bring what is called dialogue, that Africans must tell their heads of state the problems they have. And that's why he wants Professor Kimani to go to South Africa, Cape Town for training. And once he has left South Africa, Cape Town for training, he will go to Banjul, Gambia, where he will be in the Summit of Heads of State, and tell him what he wants. And that's why it's important for you to read that meeting at room 2059. What will they say at the summit? So it's important for you to understand. Through that, you can get a vice and a virtue. That the vice, uncontrolled anger, leads to misery. A virtue, when we come together as a team, we can bring positive change. So that is the question I want us to look at. Maybe it could be displayed on the screen for you. The question I want us to look at now. When we work together, we can push for an idea to bring positive change. Referring to Third Longway in Fathers of Nations, and I'm saying it, you could write it, candidates. When we work together, we can push for an idea to bring positive change. Referring to Third Longway in Fathers of Nations, write an essay to support this statement. So what do you do? In writing, there are 3 stages of writing. One is called pre-writing stage. And that second stage is the actual writing stage, and then, of course, the editing stage. So the first writing is the first step in pre-writing. Read the question carefully and understand. What does the question say? Identify the keywords. If maybe it could be displayed on your screen for you, you'll see that I've highlighted the following words. When we work together, it is in red. The next thing is we can push for an idea, which is in black. And then we have an idea, which is in blue. And then we have to bring positive change. So look at those words. We need to understand them. What do those words mean? What does it mean when that statement, when we work together? It means teamwork. It means unity. We can push for an idea. We can champion. We can advocate. We can support. And an idea, what is this idea? An idea to bring positive change. And of course, once you are identifying these keywords, then you can come up with the idea. And you know the idea that brings positive change here is path alpha. And you know the people who come together to push for that idea, do they succeed? So ask yourself the characters' actions and their outcomes. So what do they do? Then come up with 4 points to support that argument. And because the examiner expects details on actions, outcomes, and background information. The next step now in the next slide is how do you respond to KCSE questions? Still in pre-writing stage. You've not begun writing the essay. You've just started coming up with your points. The first thing is write somewhere on that question paper. Who works together with who? Because the question says when we work together, we can push for an idea to bring positive change. Ask yourself, who works with who? Okay? And what is the background information? Of course, we've been told it's Third Longway. The question was very keen, Third Longway. So we must look for another person that Third Longway works with for us to have teamwork. So we need to come up with 4 points. Then, so we say Third Longway, for instance, work with Kimani. Third Longway teams up with Melusi. Third Longway teams up with Tahir. Third Longway teams up with Chiamaka. Third Longway teams up with Afolabi. Okay? And then the thing is, we look for the background information. Background information. What led to that? What inspired them to come together and and work. It's very important to understand that. And then give the evidence of working together. How do they work together? We are going to illustrate that in a short while. And then give another evidence from the set book, not anywhere, from the set book. Give the summary of the success. What is the evidence of pushing the idea to bring positive change? How do they push for that idea? And that means your discussion must end at the summit. You must tell us what happened at the summit for each of them, because all these people go to Banjul, Gambia to push for Path Alpha. And lastly, let us see the summary. How do they succeed in relation to the question? Does Path Alpha succeed? Yes, it does. The next thing, of course, you come up after coming up with asking yourself such question, then now you come up with the points of discussion, which should now also display on your screen. What are the points of discussion? So these are the answers, the points you're going to write an essay on. The points of discussion are the points you will write. Remember, an essay is a way of communicating. You want to tell the reader that when we work together to push for a positive idea to bring change, we are going to succeed. Okay? So some of the points that you can come up with in this book, because you've read and we've been told it is Third Long Way, meaning we cannot use any other character. One is Third Long Way recruits Professor Kimani to join AGDA. That is teamwork. We are seeing Third Long Way and Professor Kimani. Another point you're going to discuss here is Third recruiting Afolabi to get an AGDA entry to the summit. And so you need to look at it. Why do they work together? Like that one, Third recruiting Professor Kimani to join AGDA. What is the background information? How does Third come to Professor Kimani? So you must give Professor Kimani's misfortunes, such as poor pay as a lecturer, losing his wife to a rich MP, the death of his daughter in a public transport because he doesn't have money to repair his old Toyota car, the suffering, and also the coming of Third Long Way explaining the problems he's facing. That is the background you must give us. And now, and how he succeeds. Does he join AGDA? Yes, he does. And then look at Afolabi, the meeting of Third Long Way on the plane with Afolabi. That is the background. What do they talk about? They talk about the keynote address at the Foundations for Democratic Rule. Very important, the background there. And then recruitment of Third recruiting Comrade Melusi to join AGDA. Very important, really, for you to look at that. Third recruiting Comrade Melusi to join AGDA. So the background will be Melusi's challenges and Third sympathy towards those challenges. And then finally, now the action will be Third asking him to join AGDA. Follow Comrade Melusi all the way to the summit and what he does at the summit. Another one is Third Long Way recruiting Engineer Tahir to join AGDA. The background will be Engineer Tahir's frustrations in Libya. One, of course, the leader of Libya has stopped the program of Feast of Allah, a program he's so passionate about. Lastly, Third recruiting, meeting the 4 observers to do that. So once we've done that, we come up with an introduction. Now we have the points, rough work. Now we are done with the pre-writing stage. The next stage now is writing, their actual writing. So what we have there is the introduction. So introduction is the first paragraph of an essay, and it tests the following. Have you understood the demands of the question? The question is talking about when you work together. Do you know what that means? So these are the things to do when writing an introduction and the things not to do. One, paraphrase the question, meaning use your own words. If the question is revenge does not pay, which words can we use in place of revenge? Someone can say vengeance. That is the same word as revenge. Does not pay. Which word can we use there? Synonyms. That revenge does not give any satisfaction. It does not bring contentment. So you can say it in your own words. Or link the keywords. Another thing you do when writing introduction, link the keywords. Show a clear relationship between the keywords, because all essays always have a cause and effect. Like here we are told revenge does not pay. Working together brings success. So working together is the cause and the outcome or the effect is success. Another way of to do is to contextualize the introduction. And contextualizing means saying this is seen in Fathers of Nations by Paul Vita. The question we have that we're focusing today is on Third Long Way. So we say this is seen in the character of third long way in Fathers of Nations. So it's important to mention the character in the introduction. Another way of presenting your introduction is you can give an outline of the points you want to discuss in the introduction. That in Fathers of Nation, Tad meets Afolabi, Kimani, Tahir, and Chiamaka Chineke to help him push for change in the summit. And that is the introduction. So we are told, do not rewrite the question. This is a sample introduction. Let's look at this sample introduction in the next slide. The question was, when we work together, we can push for an idea to bring positive change. Here we are told, the sample introduction reads, any plan to bring good governance can succeed if we work as a team. Any plan to bring good governance can succeed if you work as a team. This is seen in the story of Third Long Way in Fathers of Nations by Paul Vita. That is a sample introduction. Any plan to bring good governance can succeed if we work as a team. Notice that I've called idea, I've called it any plan. Good governance, that was what was called positive change. Succeed is the, of course, can push for. If you work as a team is when you come together. This is seen in the story of Third Long Way. That is a sample introduction. So which strategy have I used? I've paraphrased, where I've provided synonyms that mean the same thing. The next thing is developing the body. And now learners, you need to pay attention, because this is where most learners get it wrong. They do not know how to develop the point. Now, the paragraph has got structures. The first structure of the first part of a paragraph is called the topic sentence. So the topic sentence should cover the following always. It should answer the question. By doing what? By mentioning the character there and the action of that character and the outcome. So remember, the question was working together can bring change. So I must say Tad works with Professor Kimani to bring positive change. I must see it. That is just the topic sentence. Very important. It's not about explanation. In the first sentence of an essay, you are not explaining anything. You are just telling the reader what to expect. Now, then, an example of a topic sentence is there. Third Long Way successfully recruits Professor Kimani to AGDA by appealing to his frustrations with the failures of African leadership. That is the topic sentence. So we're going to see how Third Long Way successfully recruits. So whatever you'll expect in the body of this paragraph is something to do with the Third Long Way recruiting Professor Kimani. And when an examiner is marking this kind of essay, they can easily award you a point there, because that is the point, because you've written a very good topic sentence. The next sentence that follows now is the illustrating sentences or developing sentences. And this one gives background information. Which events lead to the conflict in the story? Okay? Like what made Third Long Way meet Professor Kimani? Why does Professor Kimani join AGDA? Give the specific details, and these details must come from the set book. A good example, which will be displayed on your screen now, is as a lecturer, Professor Kimani's salary is not enough to meet his needs as they are taxed. The MPs, on the other hand, change laws to increase their salaries the much they want and exempt them from being taxed. Professor Kimani loses his daughter in a road accident because he does not have money to repair his car, forcing the daughter to use public transport that kills her. The wife also, Asia Omondi, leaves him to marry his former colleague Newborn, who is an MP, because the wife thinks that, of course, the MP is rich. Professor Kimani fights the MP for taking his wife, and this makes him to be jailed for 6 months and to be demoted by the university. We are given the background. Why does Kimani join AGDA? So these details are very important, the frustrations there that make him join AGDA. And now the next thing that follows are the details of the action. What are the details of the action? Now, how do they work? What is the unity? Because the action in this question was unity, coming together. Now, how does the third coming together with Kimani bring change? So it's important to give the details of the action, how they work together, and then the outcome, the success. Give details from the book, and then the last sentence in that paragraph should link it to the question. Does that unity bring success? Does it successfully push for an idea? An example of a paragraph that shows all the three, the action and the outcome and the clincher, is on the screen now. That third reminds Kimani that while Africans initially promised to eradicate poverty, ignorance, and disease, They later added the fourth one and the fifth one, corruption and impunity. Third, Longway convinces him that the meaningful change requires urgency, which Agda embodies, and that he, Kimani, can be its agent since he already has suffered an ugly state. Look at the two men working together. And Kimani joins Agda, okay? Of course, why does he join Agda? Because Agda is providing him solutions. And at the summit, he calls for teachers. When he's given a chance to speak at the summit, he calls for teachers to be respected. He urges the heads of state to adopt Path Alpha, as it will ensure that teachers are respected. Luckily, Path Alpha is adopted and Kimani is filled with joy. Thanks to Thad's unity call, Kimani is able to champion for teachers' rights. So you see the outcome of the unity, that Kimani has agreed to join Agda to fight for change. And we are seeing him given a chance, being given a chance at the summit, and even speaks. So what is the last thing of, that is the body. The same you do it to other 4 points. The other 3 points, I've just used 1 point on Professor Kimani to talk about the change. I mean how unity can bring change. The next paragraph will be now Professor Kimani, Thad Longway working with Engineer Tahir. Another one will be Thad Longway working with Comrade Melusi. Another paragraph will be Thad Longway working with Afolabi. Thad Longway working with Pastor Chiamaka Chineke. And you give the background details as I've stated there. Now, the last paragraph of your essay is going to be on, it's called the conclusion. Now, the conclusion summarizes your argument. So, basically, what you are saying, learners, that an essay must have 6 paragraphs. So, conclusion is the last paragraph of an essay. It introduces, you can start with in conclusion, followed by a summary of your points, or a call to action. You can advise people on what to be done. An example of a conclusion to that question can be, in conclusion, people who work together can bring positive change. Do not repeat the question, come up with your own words. Or in conclusion, there is need for ordinary citizens to mobilize and demand for change. And that is how to write an essay. Some of the questions you can try at home, and I request this to be played on your screen, or you can buy my book to get those questions and how to answer them. Some of the moral values that can be tested in this book are: unchecked anger does not bring justice but only leads to misery. Change is not an individual effort. It requires teamwork and coordination. The consequences of bad leadership. Revenge may result in more pain. Change begins with individuals willing to stand up against oppression. We can mold the heart of our past into our wishes for a better future. Selfish ambitions can hinder the greater good, allowing oppressive regimes to thrive. Women in the society face numerous struggles. So those are some of the changes you can have. That marks the end of our lesson. It has been good hosting you here and teaching you essay writing on Fathers of Nation. I have been your host, Tony Brian Ochieng. My phone number is 0701-404-151. I want to wish you well even as we resume school the next week. Bye and have a very good evening.
Are you an aspiring media practitioner, a graduate, or you just want to advance your skills in television production? Then welcome to Kenyatta